Good evening, I'm Kathy Lewis. We couldn't let the end of 2008 slip by without checking in once again with four people who've brought such energy and insight to this table over the past year. Vivian Page, who blogs on the Democratic side of things, Brian Kerwin, who blogs from the Republican perspective, Kimball Payne reports for the Daily Press and blogs at the paper's shadplank.com, and Don Lozado writes editorials at the Virginian Pilot and at pilotonline.com. Thanks to all of you for being with us in these closing days of 2008.
Good to see you.
One of these days, what we're going to do is turn the cameras on before we go on the air and just record. That would be quite the show. So we will do our best to replicate some of those conversation moments here as time will allow. But I'm so happy to have had you all in conversation for the last couple of months here. It's made it very interesting for us, and I hope for you as well, and I certainly hope for our viewers as well. Wow, so we're coming to the end of 2008, and we should talk about the news of moment first, I suppose, and that is the governor's proposed budget. Tough times in Richmond, tough times across the Commonwealth. The governor says something on the order of a $2.9 billion shortfall, but the Senate Finance Committee says more like 3.2. Any way you slice it, budget cuts coming. And cigarette taxes seem to have been the main place where the governor hopes to raise some revenue by doubling that cigarette tax. What do you think?
Well, I think the important thing is just to remember the governor's budget as a starting point. I mean, it's very important how he structures it and what you're talking about in terms of shortfalls. But from here, this just gets tossed to the lawmakers, and this is their battle to have. So I'm interested to see, where the cuts are going to be, how they're going to, work it out. It seems clear that the budget's going to be the dominant theme of the General Assembly session, and I don't know how the cigarette tax flies.
Yeah. And when you look at that proposed budget, did the governor live up to that expectation that everything was on the table?
Well, you're talking about health care, you're talking about public education. Yeah. I mean, these are things that have been sacred cows for a long time. Right. And so, I mean, clearly they're in a time where they've got to look at some of these places that have been held off limits. And I think lawmakers have been talking about that. You heard it from guys like Phil Hamilton and Chuck Hogan. I mean, they were talking about it a couple of weeks ago, saying, listen, those are going to have to be on the table for us to get this done.
Yeah. I think the size of the deficit gives them no choice. They've got to cut deep, and they've got to cut a lot. I think the question I've got is how much worse it's going to get before they solve it. I mean, I see this on a downward slide still, and I think $3 billion is probably the starting point for what's going to have to come out of that budget.
I heard someone say the other day who has some knowledge of these kinds of issues that they expect it'll be 3.5 to 4 before all is said and done, and so that's quite a chunk. It's going to
be a lot. It's going to be a lot. I mean, the economy has not even begun to come out of this recession yet, so we've still got certainly going to have fewer dollars coming into the government coffer. So it's just going to get worse. I won't be surprised if it ends up being $4 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, that's in the conversation.
Yeah. The only thing that's depressing is it's sad to see the governor trying to fill the hole that he dug himself. He was told by the Republicans all last session, the revenue projections you're counting on, we don't believe them. You're not going to hit 4%, 6% revenue growth. We're building a budget, and the money's not going to be there at the end of the year.
But they've been saying that since Warner had to fill a hole.
It would be nice if you listened to it. For once, the boy you cried wolf, there was an actual wolf.
Well, but that's the problem, is that they cry wolf all the time. And let's face it, the governor's just one person. If the Republicans truly were concerned about it, then they would have fixed the budget themselves. I mean, it's a two-way street. You can stand back and you can complain that the governor did this. Well, the governor didn't do it by himself.
Well, the General Assembly didn't come up with the revenue estimates. That was the governor's Secretary of Finance who said, here's the revenue we project.
Yeah, but if they didn't agree with those, there's nothing that stops the General Assembly from revising those estimates and revising the budget accordingly. So don't put it all on the governor.
They tried. That Democratic Senate had a stranglehold.
But you look at that, the finger pointing. I mean, who knew Bear Stearns and Lehman
Right.
Brothers?
I mean, that was sort of, some people would say
there are a lot of smart people looking for jobs.
There's a lot of Democrats who did a whole lot of winning this year based on finger pointing. Let's just be fair that when there's fingers pointing the other way.
I think there's blame aplenty to go around here, but it would be nice if we get back to first principles. What should government be spending money on? How much should it raise, and how much should it not raise? What should it leave alone? But we're not even talking about that. Everything is about Band-Aids. It's about filling holes and getting new revenue and cutting spending incrementally.
That's what a cigarette tax is. It's a Band-Aid.
Absolutely.
Here's cigarette smoking.
Exactly.
Guess where cigarette smoking revenue
Yeah.
from taxes are
Right,
going to be?
right.
Well, you know, and I see that, but the other thing I wonder about, and I think it's in some respects the same argument you could make about the gas tax conversations that come up from time to time is, yes, it is a diminishing revenue over time, but people are still smoking at the moment, and they probably will still be smoking for the next couple of years. You know, we do, gas prices dropped, and all of a sudden everybody's out buying gas guzzling cars. Is it legitimate to say, if Virginia has one of the lowest cigarette taxes in the country, tobacco taxes in the country, is it legitimate to say, hey, there's a place where you can find a lot of money?
It's legitimate, and it's probably popular because twice as many people don't smoke as do.
Now, yeah.
But it's not responsible. It's a pittance. It's a Band-Aid's probably an over exemption, and
So what
another
would you
problem.
do?
Well, another problem is Tim Kaine's already said if this tax goes into effect, he's going to spend the money. He's going to take away some of his proposed budget cuts and
Fill in the
and
cuts
fill-
that have already been made. Yeah.
So
It's distracting
But
from
again,
another
that's the
fight.
starting point.
Exactly, but it's also distracting
Hey,
from the
not
fight
the
over.
starting point. He also wants to put felons back on the street to save money.
Now, see, that's an interesting element of this thing, because a lot of people say so many of the felons, the convicted folk who are in prison, are on drug-related, nonviolent
Correct.
charges,
technical violations,
or for
sure.
technical violations. So, if you pull those people who don't have a history of violence out, doesn't that save some money in the budget?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think we've got to look at all the pieces, and this is one of the pieces that fits. There's no sense in filling up the prisons. We've got lots of folks in prison that didn't do violent felonies, and to reintegrate them into our society as well as cut the costs makes perfect sense.
Well, then the governor should get some guts and go ahead and pardon people that he thinks are no threat and save a whole lot of money in prisons. Let him pardon people if he thinks it'll save that much money.
You guys didn't scream about that, though.
Oh, we'll scream. Oh, yeah, we have this novel concept that when a judge sentences somebody, they should actually serve that time. And I think most
Well,
Virginians
it wasn't
agree
a
with that.
concept until George Allen implemented the truth in sentencing. That was not always the case. So it's not like we have this 150-year history of giving someone a sentence and keeping them there for the whole time.
Yeah, correct.
That's not the case.
The last time the
We've only
Democrats
done
were
that.
in charge, you're right, sentences were free and easy. I just think
That's
that
not a case of the Democrats being in charge, Brian. And believe, no.
we just took over in 1993, and that was just the governor's mansion. So you've got the governor's mansion now. If he wants to save some money, he could take out his pardon pen and save a whole lot of money. I think most Virginians say, serve the time if you did the crime.
So we've seen what the governor's put out there, which you say is a starting point. What would you do? I mean, how would you?
See, there's the caucus of no. The caucus of no says, no, we can't do that. Ask them what they want to do.
Vivian, we'll get you your own show, I promise.
I actually was on the phone with
Yeah.
two delegates this morning saying, why don't you freeze previous year spending? Just stop.
Just stop there.
Just stop.
Yeah.
Freeze previous year
How does
spending.
that solve a problem? I mean,
It stops the bleeding.
but budgets have a tendency to expand, spending.
Not when you freeze them.
True, but you're freezing it at
Freeze
a
it
point.
for a year.
You're freezing it at a point at which it's already expanded for however long we've been in existence.
And it doesn't account for the revenue drop as
Precisely.
well.
Don't we at some point need to stop, look at how we're spending, how we're raising money, and rationalize it?
Yes, we do. We're going to do that in a 45-day session.
No, but it might get us started.
Which
I'd
gets
say
us, which actually,
it's a short session. I say freeze spending and let the gubernatorial candidates spend the entire year talking about where to take the next budget.
Which brings up an interesting
which brings
point.
up the issue to me, which is this idea of part-time legislature trying to accomplish something for a budget process in 45 days or 60 days of the last long session. I'm of the opinion it's time for us to get beyond the planter mentality that meets between January and February in between planning seasons and actually have a legislature that is a working legislature that works all year round.
You guys want these in office full? You want these guys in office full time?
couple of
I
years,
tell
they
you
practically
the
have.
reason why. There are multiple reasons. One of the reasons is that we have eliminated a whole group of people from serving simply because most folks cannot leave their job for 30 days, 45 days, and go sit in Richmond. The other part of it is that that's why there's no CPAs up there, by the way. The other part of it is that they really literally are working full-time anyway, and yet we are still constantly going back, oh, we're only going to be in session this long, which is why nothing ends up getting done. So it's time for us to look at having people who are compensated properly. It's a $17,000 a year job for a delegate.
That looks great from the newspaper side of things.
I'm not sure I want professional legislators. I think the perspective that we're getting from all these guys who have jobs.
You're missing a perspective,
Okay.
and the perspective you're missing is all those people who cannot serve because it's a part-time, who can't leave their jobs for 60 days.
So we get a bunch of professional legislators who don't
What
do
do we
anything
have
else?
now? What do we have now? We have a bunch of professional legislators.
Well, we have a lot of lawyers, but we also have pharmacists and college professors and mortgage brokers.
We have a few of those people.
Sure.
They're not representative, and so as a result, we have limited the pool of candidates by not paying a reasonable wage, and certainly by not having a full-time legislature. When you spend $700,000 to earn a seat that pays $17,000, do you think they're listening to us? I mean, we have to be honest about these things and try to figure out, in the great big picture, what is best for Virginia. It's not what's best for me, but what's best for Virginia.
I guess the question is, do we think the General Assembly does a better or worse job than Congress does?
It's an interesting question. And you stumped the panel, Brian.
Wow.
Well done. Well done. We were talking about what is best for Virginia. It made me think about this battle that we've been waging. And I have to laugh because Kimball Payne frequently says, I could just plagiarize my own stuff from a couple of years ago, just write the same stories about transportation then and now, because it does seem like we're at the same place. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's very frustrating, especially because, I live on the South Side, work on the peninsula. I have foot in both worlds. I understand the concepts coming from both sides, and it's one of those cases where psychologically the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is, you cannot underestimate the importance of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel to the peninsula, to the lawmakers, to the citizens, to everyone.
And you may recall, it was actually at this very table around which we sit, we had Mayor Paul Frame and Delegate Glenn Oder, and Delegate Oder said, look, I'll get on board with your 6 transportation projects that are already on the table. I need your support to help follow through on a study that would look at expanding the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel within the existing right-of-ways. And so they had that moment, that meeting of the minds on that. That study was done, well, a study was done, I should say, by the Department of Transportation, came back with 6 different alternatives and laid them out on the table, and Norfolk essentially said, well, we don't like any of those. Yeah. So this thing that's so politically important to people on the peninsula, and I think you would have to agree if you talk to folks on the peninsula, they're saying this has to be part of any deal.
I think they are, and from the South Side's perspective, I mean, if you look at all the transportation projects as a system, what they should do is ease pressure on the HRBT. That should happen as a result of building everything else. The question is whether, I mean, I think the folks on the peninsula, and you can speak to this better than I can, see expanding the HRBT as critical to relieving the congestion there. So it's a matter of, do you build a road right where you need it, or do you build all the other things to take the pressure off the road? And I'm not sure that anybody's done a very good job of explaining that. I probably just did a lousy one.
Well, no, I think one of the biggest problems with it is you're dealing with so many layers and so many players who hold different strings in this argument. Right. You've got metropolitan planners who set the agenda. You've got General Assembly folks who have the purse strings. And then, so the voters aren't sure who to be mad at. They're not really sure what the Metropolitan Planning Organization is, because I can't even get my mom interested in that, and I'm writing about it. Right. And you get these different players, and everything's moving pieces like this, and how are you going to win an argument when everything's going? It's just vertigo.
And there's no money at all.
No.
There's none.
Yeah, your point is
there's absolutely no money.
Anyway.
And I think there was an interesting story from Suffolk, which is where I live. They're talking about actually expanding, widening, or bypassing a federal highway themselves because they can't get the money from the state or the feds to do it. It's in part to support a cargo project, a terminal, a distribution complex, but that's a radical change.
They're talking about themselves going directly to the feds.
Bonding it. No, about bonding it themselves to build this project, and that's just sort of a radical change in who pays for roads.
Wow. Yeah. And Brian,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Brian, you said you think there's actually something a little more afoot with this study that was eventually done. You think that the study that was ordered was designed in a certain way.
I remember the last study where they came out and said, well, gee, the third crossing looks like the best possible choice because all the other alternatives were sickeningly inflated, like 10 lanes for the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. And I think this one, too, I think they found a lot of choices of where to go with the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel that would take out a lot of existing homes and said, okay, now which do you like better, taking out homes or the third crossing? It wasn't an even comparison point. If you're interested in congestion relief, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is the answer. If you're interested in economic development and port expansion, your third crossing is the answer.
I don't think it's that simple.
I think it is that simple.
No, congestion comes with the third crossing. Congestion relief comes with the third crossing.
Do you think people over the peninsula are going to drive towards Richmond to take the Monitor Merrimack to come to Norfolk?
No, but traffic will...
To the port, to come into the Navy base?
Right.
Yes.
And
that
traffic
falls
will
right in,
divert,
actually,
too.
with what he says.
Oh, I know exactly what he's saying about economic development.
But one of the biggest problems, I think, has been that the MPO has not been
Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Right, has not been transparent at all in what they're doing, and they presented their projects, their list of projects, without any real input from what the citizens wanted or needed.
We're actually going to be talking about
and
that
I
in some
say
of our
that
programs
I only
to
say
come.
that you guys, we understand that there's meetings and we know when to go to the meetings, but Joe Blow can't do that, you know. And so they had an afternoon session where they talked about transportation and they piped it into the peninsula, but it was in the middle of the afternoon, and you're asking for public input. How? How are you going to get that?
Yeah.
They're engaging, the idea of engaging the public is not something that they're very good at.
But you've been doing this for 10 years. You know, the first time we saw Philip Chouquet come on the scene was when we were talking about the third crossing in the mid-90s. Just hold on one second. And if you blame these guys because we're not paying attention, you really can't. Listen, I've been to enough of these meetings, written enough of these stories that a lot of people haven't read. I know that people don't care. I mean,
Go to
unless
Northern
I say
Virginia. What's
tolls.
the model difference? What's the difference between the MPO in Northern Virginia and the MPO down here? The MPO in Northern Virginia has gotten the resources. They got together. They've gotten things done that we haven't been able to do down here. Now,
And why do you
is
think that is?
Because they sit in a room and talk amongst themselves.
Well,
You
they're
mean
going through
here
a
or
reform
there?
process.
Okay.
They are.
And
They're going
so-
through a massive
you see
reform
what I- you
process
see what
right
I-
now.
They are, because
The local
what they've
MPO.
seen,
Yes,
what
exactly
they've,
so.
what they've learned from looking at MPOs from throughout, not just the Virginia MPOs, but ones all throughout the United States, is that our MPO is not operating like an MPO. It's not functioning. There's a board issue with the HRDPC and all these.
Well,
I mean,
and we
it's a lot of
probably we're way
complications.
down in the
Anyway,
weeds
sorry.
at the we're down in the weeds on that issue for most of the people, because as you point out, a lot of people don't understand what the MPO is. So we will be doing some programs on that. So we will come back to that. But just remember, if you will, bookmark this degree of confusion about it, and we'll come back on another evening to that. Bookmark confusion. That's the new phrase for 2009. There you go. Speaking of bookmarking confusion, we should probably talk about the upcoming gubernatorial race, which is getting to be a pretty crowded field, at least on the Democratic side of things. You had, of course, you've had Brian Moran, who is announced, and Cree Deeds, who's run previously for statewide office. Late to the game, you have Terry McAuliffe, the fundraiser, head of Hillary Clinton's campaign. What do we make of that?
Fun.
I think your guys kind of sitting there going, go ahead on, right?
Yeah, we'll raise money for the general elections. You guys figure out amongst yourself. You know, talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
I'll give you a topic.
And of course, Bob McDonnell, Attorney General, is really the
Worked out
only.
very well for the Republicans in the presidential
No,
race.
no, it didn't. So.
I mean, slug it out. Who knows? I mean, these guys may come out stronger. I think it's going to be interesting tactically and strategically to see how Moran, McAuliffe, and Deeds work. I mean, because you already seen that McAuliffe is affecting the race, even though he's technically not in it. Now, what does that do, and how does that play out, and how do these guys get people's attention for an early June primary?
Actually, he is in it because, you know, Virginia law doesn't have exploratory committees. So so he really is in the race.
Listen,
I mean, so, you know, he can say he formed an exploratory committee, but he really didn't because we don't have exploratory committees. But, you know, in the interest of full disclosure, of course, I've already endorsed Brian Moran in this race, and I did that a long time ago. But the truth is that it's going to be an exciting time because we're building on where the Democrats have come through the last election. And so you just kind of keep that enthusiasm going and keeping people engaged. So, well, the Republicans are going to have a hard time getting their people engaged while Bob McDonnell's
Is
raising
that
money.
true?
No, we're laughing at Democrats' fight about taxes. You've got Brian Moran and Cree Deeds that says every tax needs to be on the table. And Terry McAuliffe making headlines saying, no, you don't raise taxes in a recession. What are you, nuts? And all of a sudden, a bunch of Republicans are like, oh, wow. We're used to seeing Democrats basically agree on every issue, especially the key ones. And if they're going to have a debate and a fight, it's usually about the 18th list. The 18th thing on the list that they disagree about, and it's, you know, it's a yawner. If they're going to fight about taxes and Terry McAuliffe's going to go against Brian Moran and Cree Deeds, we're going to have a nice fight about an issue that people really care about. And McAuliffe, I think, hit a populist vein there.
But you've also said that you really feel like the Republican Party has some work to do in terms of its own image in Virginia in the rebuilding of the party.
You know, and I wrote about this with the Republicans' advance, which is they retreat, but they don't retreat, so they advance, and they advance all the way to the homestead with more golf courses per capita than I care to think about. And they're like, okay, guys, yeah, we're going to reach out to the everyday independent voter, and we're going to do it from the homestead.
It's a big, expensive 10.
We obviously have some work to do. We have a lot of people at the table. There are people who want to get involved, just don't know if they're welcome to the tent. And we do have to do our part to go back and it's not so much reinvigorate the Reagan coalition, if it's even there anymore, but it is to understand that the Virginia electorate is not majority Democrat. It's not majority Republican. There's a giant chunk of a third in there that's independent, and they're willing to vote for whoever's competent.
And so, is he right in that analysis, Don?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the gubernatorial race is going to be entirely different from the presidential race. I suspect that whoever the Democrats end up nominating is going to have a far harder time holding together the coalition that Obama won here than we think. McDonnell is the home team. I mean, he, was
current Attorney General from Virginia Beach.
Right. So it's going to be very different. I mean, Hampton Roads was pivotal to Obama winning Virginia. I'm not sure that it's going to be pivotal for the Democrats. It may be, but
I think that you have to look at a couple of different things. One is looking towards the primary in June, and looking at the primary is totally different from looking at the general election come November. So starting with the primary in June, you're talking about a different group of voters who are going to be involved in the selection of the Democratic nominee. But when you start getting into the general election, once we get past that June 9th primary, now you're talking about whether or not you can not only keep some of those votes, because, we have those federal voters. That's pretty much what we call them. They show up every 4 years, and they disappear for 4 years. So it's going to be a matter of whether or not some of the activists who got involved in the campaign are going to stay engaged and going to continue to work because they believe in what the Democrats want to accomplish. And I think there's an effort underway, certainly, to keep those folks engaged. Now, that's not the voters being engaged, it's the activists being engaged. And it's growing, exactly, and it's growing the pool of activists so that there are more and more of those folks out there, and as we bring them along, and I say we from the standpoint that we who are involved bring along the other folks who maybe don't know the Democratic candidates for governor, who maybe don't know, these guys. We've also got the House of Delegates races coming up, so I mean, we've got a lot of stuff, a lot of reason for people to stay involved.
I think anything you learn from an election is that the party that loses tends to retool, regroup, and come back stronger. I mean, you saw what happened when the Republicans lost the state Senate. The Senate worked together, Republicans in the Senate worked together like they hadn't in years, because they were in the minority now. I think we're also ignoring something that's very interesting, which is Bob McDonnell and how he's going to pursue this race. I mean, you want to focus a lot of the attention on the Democratic side, but it is also interesting to watch McDonnell, because whenever we see McDonnell now, he's talking about dogfighting, internet sexual predators. I mean, these are not, he's going to be out there softening his image. Now, how does he do that? He's got to crack jokes. He's got to be, I mean, this is going to be a different side of Bob McDonnell that we haven't seen.
And we will explore that and much more when we come back in 2009 for our next editorial roundtable.
Are we done?
Can we count on all of you? Yes, wasn't that a charming and attractive way to indicate we're wrapped up?
Absolutely.
Pretty nice, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Hostess with the mostest, that's me. So you all coming back in 2009? Will you be here?
you gave me a parking pass.
There you go. You got the parking pass. You're around the table.
One.
All right.
Mine expires on December 31st.
We're going to go get Vivian a parking pass, and I'll be back in a moment with a final thought. What a year it's been. Among the major moments of 2008 for those of us here is the launch of this broadcast, and your viewership tells us we're on the right track. The kind of conversation we're having tonight with journalists and bloggers is one we haven't had in public broadcasting at the local level until this year. And we're grateful to have found a comfortable home in the Friday night public affairs lineup you've come to know and trust over the years. While mine is the enormous privilege of coming into your homes each week, you should know that there are many, many people who work very hard behind the scenes each week to bring you this program. And as you read their names at the end of this broadcast, I hope you'll appreciate their good work as much as I do. We always like to hear from you. You can give us a call at 889-9437 or email us at whatmatters@whro.org. Next week, we'll have a look back at some of the key moments on this broadcast in 2008. And you can bet the folks you've heard from tonight make an appearance in that broadcast as well. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.